Hi, all, and welcome to part two. We're talking about water. So, we're going to look at how water's hydrogen bonding to itself, cohesion, and to the walls of the xylem actually lead to its ascent up from the roots to the tops of the trees. Okay, so we'll start have a bunch of slides to try to show you. They all show you something different. Some of them come from chapter 36, which is water transport in plants. But I thought it might make it a little easier to understand. Some of them are somewhat complicated looking. Okay, so this is what it says. Cohesion helps the transport of water against gravity in plants. And why is it not the sole thing? It's because adhesion is also involved. And we have something called root pressure, which is a positive pressure of water coming in from the soil. And that can help to move water up the xylem to a certain number of feet. And then after that, gravity would counteract the root pressure. And so there has to be a different force that can take the water up and out. And so this is where we're talking about cohesion. Okay, so I think one of the first things to take a look at is where this is happening. What are the types of cells? So at functional maturity, the cells of the xylem are dead, which means that you don't have any cytoplasm in there or anything, but what's left behind is the structure of the cell wall. There's two main types of water conducting cells, these ones that are called tracheids, which are thinner and sort of have tapered ends, as you can see here, and then these wider, shorter things called vessel elements. So both of these are types of cells of the xylem, and both are dead, functional maturity, and so they are basically hollowed out tubes or straws, if you want to think about it, with walls that are made up of cellulose, which I'll show you in a moment. I just want to point out one thing is that you see these sort of things that are called pits. It allows, as you can see from this little arrow here, water to move from one cell to another without even passing through the cell wall. So there's water movement both up and from one of these elements to the other, in the straws. If you had multiple straws, this doesn't work, of course, but multiple straws side by side. And so instead of having one very thin straw, you could have the benefit of several straws because the water or whatever you were drinking could go up the thin straw and then to the side. And so you'd have several conducting elements and they're sort of in communication with one another through these pits. And then this is an actual photograph of it, which I think is beautiful. So you can see the different ones, and they've pointed them out with these little arrows. So you can see that the vessels are bigger and wider, and these tracheids are thinner, thinner type cells. Okay, so I said to you that they're hollowed out, dead at functional maturity, and that the walls are made of cellulose, but you don't yet know cellulose. That's chapter 5. So I'll tell you that cellulose is a polymer, so a repeating as a macromolecule, very large molecule that's made up of repeating units. And in this case, the repeating units are glucose monomers or glucose parts, right? And so this is a long string of the sugar glucose bonded one to the next, to the next, to the next. And one of the main things about sugars is that they have lots of these hydroxyl groups, these OHs that you see here. And that is a polar bond. As we know, the H is much less electronegative than the O. So there's polarity in that covalent bond, the O to the H. And so this allows for hydrogen bonds to form between these long chains of glucose. You can see it's called a glucose monomer. And the beta is just telling you its orientation, basically, when it makes a bond to the next single unit. Monomer is single unit. I'll tell you again in chapter 5. So it's multiple, it's long chains made up exclusively of glucose parts like this, and they are bonded to each other. And that's what you see there. That's the so-called microfibril, which if you tease it apart, it's all these cellulose molecules. Okay, so it's incredibly polar because every sugar, every glucose has all of these OHs. So it's very, very polar. And that is exactly, as you can see, they blew up the cell wall. That's what the cell wall is made of. So we are going to have two forces, right? Cohesion, which is going to be the force between the same molecules. It's going to be water holding itself together with other water molecules by hydrogen bonds, but then this thing called adhesion, which I promised to tell you about, it's an attraction between different substances. So in this case, it's going to be between water and the cellulose of the cell walls that we see here. So then I showed this picture to you because I think this has a better picture of adhesion. So the cohesion is what my cursor is over here, because that's one water molecule to the next, to the next, to the next. The adhesion is the water molecule to the cell wall. So it's this bond here. So it's also hydrogen bonding, right? It's one water molecule hydrogen bonded to the cellulose hydroxyl groups, right? So they line themselves up. So it's still hydrogen bonds involved. It's just that it's a water molecule with a hydroxyl group of a sugar rather than one water molecule with another, which is cohesion. So that's why they're pointing out cohesion. Actually, that line should probably point more to this hydrogen bond here. Cohesion is holding these two, and adhesion is this hydrogen bond right there. Okay, so we have water molecules that are cohering to one another and adhering to the cell wall. See, adhesion by hydrogen bonding, cohesion by hydrogen bonding. Hydrogen bonding is really like the main thing that water molecules do. So we have to start at the top though. So this is how we can see how they can form a continuous column, right? Because all the water molecules are clinging to one another and clinging to the walls. But how that's not the way that they get up. That's how they form a continuous column of water. But how do they get up? And we have to sort of start at the top. So if we start at the top, and we look at sort of a cross section of a leaf. So here's what they're telling you is the upper epidermis of the leaf, and then this is the bottom end. And most of the time, these spaces that are called stomata, is it on this slide? Maybe it's on this one. Yeah, stomata is the plural. Here's the singular, stoma. Right here are those two cells that we see in that other slide. Guard cells. Guard this opening. A stoma is a mouth. It guards the opening basically to the interior of the leaf. So that's what you see there. These gray guard cells in this slide are these blue cells or green cells in this slide. Okay, so we've got guard cells that are regulated and can open and close depending on the conditions. Now, why would they ever open, basically swell and open and allow exchange of gases? And the reason is it's not to allow water to go out, right? Because the plant is always in jeopardy of drying out. They open the stomata, plant opens the stomata for this reason, so that it can take up CO2, right? Because that's how it does photosynthesis. It doesn't make sugars, food for itself, unless it can take up CO2. So it has to balance its need for CO2 for photosynthesis with its desire not to die due to dehydration, right? And so the minute that these stomata are open, these two are stomata, the minute this stoma is open, you can see there's a big blue line of water going out. Oxygen also goes out because it's a byproduct of photosynthesis, so it goes out into the atmosphere. It's helpful for us, of course, and they take up our waste, which is carbon dioxide to use. But so the plant is always balancing its need for carbon dioxide with its need to keep water, but water loss is a necessary byproduct of having to take the gas, as I said. So why is water lost? Well, water's lost because if you see all this white here, all this area, this is what we call like the air space of the plant, and it's very, very moist. I wrote here it's saturated with water vapor. So all of these air spaces that are here, they've blown this one up over here, but all of these air spaces are saturated with water, and there is a film of water that covers the cell walls. So each one of this is a cell, a cell, a cell, a cell, and they have the cell wall in this lighter, I'll just draw my thing, and that's the cell wall where I put my red line. And there's a water film that covers this. So we've got water film covering our cells, or these plant cells here, and we have this entire airspace saturated with water. So in most cases, the air outside the plant is drier than this internal space. Thus, when the stomata are open, then water evaporates, right? It has already evaporated right into here. Sorry, you've already evaporated the water into the airspace. So when you open these stomata, water leaves, right? Because there's less water vapor out in the air than there is in these internal air spaces. Okay, now that diffusion of water out into the dry air then leads to additional evaporation of water from this water film, right? Because it's replacing the water that left the plant leaf. Right? So it's replacing that, so that puts a pull on the water and water evaporates into this space. And as the water evaporates, this picture is trying to show you that the surface tension gets stronger, right? So we have, it's trying to show you this is A, and then it'll be B, it'll next be B. So it's getting, the curvature is getting greater. So the curvature of this water film is getting even greater, which is going to exert a pull on the water molecule. So the surface tension is increased. All right, so this is going to then put a pull on the water that is coming from. This is what you see here, because all this blue is supposed to show you water leaving. So here's the xylem in cross section. And so the loss of water from the space pulls water out of the liquid, basically, and evaporates it into the space to replace. And then this is going to be transmitted all the way down. Then we go to this. We say, water molecules exiting the xylem into the leaf, because that's what you see here. You see water molecules that are exiting the xylem into the leaf to then basically make it, once the stomata are open, then they leave. It's a continuous pull back. It's a tension. It's a negative pressure on the rest of it. So it says water molecules exiting the xylem, these straws, the vascular nature of the tree, pull on adjacent water molecules, right? So, and this is relayed molecule by molecule down the entire column of water in the xylem. And so let's now take a look at this picture, because maybe this helps us now that we know like a little bit. So you can see these little blue dots are the water molecules. Right, so the water evaporates out. It's not that the leaves are raining liquid water, right? This is water molecule, but as a gas. So this is leaving like that, and then water molecule moves from the film into the airspace, replaces it, and then basically it's all tugging. It's all gonna, that water has just left this region, causes water to come out of the xylem, right, and replace it. So there's a pull, and because they're all connected, all of these water molecules, that's where they're trying to show them to you like a chain or a column, since they're all holding on to each other through cohesion, through this extensive hydrogen bonding, then the pull that starts at the top based on the evaporation of water from the water film, and then the loss of the water vapor to the outside of the air through these stoma, pulls back, right? It tugs on it because that surface tension gets even greater at the air-water interface, and it exerts a pull. And that pull doesn't break the chain because the chain is continuous based on the cohesion of water molecules to themselves, and then back to, this drawing, also from your book, and the adhesion to the walls. So it's like the water molecules are crawling up the walls and holding on to each other in a continuous chain, and that is transmitted down the entire length of the xylem. So water can be pulled up. It's not a positive pressure. It's not being, root pressure is, as I told you, involved in movement a little bit up, couple feet, right? It's a negative pull, right? It's a pulling on, not people. If you had a chain of people, let's say, right? It's not people being pushed from behind and holding onto each other. You're pulling the first one in the chain, and then they're pulling on everyone behind them. So the negative pressure is coming from the top and then being transmitted all the way down because of this cohesion and because of the adhesion. Okay, let's see if the little video that your book provides helps.
How does water get from the roots of a tree to its leaves? The evaporation of water from leaves moves water molecules up from the roots. The evaporation exerts a pull that is relayed downward along a string of water molecules from leaf to root. Hydrogen bonds cause water molecules to stick together, a phenomenon called cohesion. As each water molecule evaporates, it pulls on the next water molecule, and it pulls on the next. This relays the pull of evaporating water molecules all the way down to the roots. The cohesion of water helps to keep gravity from pulling the water molecules back down.
Okay, so maybe that helps a little, or to at least see them moving up in the chain and just allowing you to know that they're all connected to each other. Okay, so we've dealt with cohesive behavior a little bit, like as it relates to surface tension, and we saw that also in the water transport. And now let's look at one of the amazing properties, which is that water expands upon freezing. That is not normally the case for many, many, many other types of substances. Okay, so we can start with liquid water, and I also have a little video for this as well. In liquid water, we have hydrogen bonds being broken, made and broken and made and broken, and just happening so quickly, right? Trillions of times per second. So they're in constant motion, right? The energy of motion, kinetic energy. So these water molecules are making and breaking hydrogen bonds with neighboring molecules and moving all over. So if we take a snapshot at any given time, right, it says a single water molecule makes an average of somewhere around 3.5 hydrogen bonds. How do you make 3.5? It's like, well, because you've made and broken. So you take a look, right, at any one period of time, right? So it's water molecules can be very close together, basically, in liquid water, making and breaking these bonds and interacting with one another. As the kinetic energy is lessened, the energy of motion is lessened, and the water molecules are not moving as fast, they cool down, right, and they slow down, then each, especially when they go into making ice, each water molecule is maximally bound to 4 other water molecules, right? So this means, and I put a little bracket, a little rectangle to show you that if you were to count how many of exactly the same size, if you were to count how many water molecules are in this bracket and how many are in this bracket, there's far more water molecules per volume in liquid water than they are in ice. And the reason for that is because when a water molecule makes hydrogen bonds with 4 other water molecules, they hold each other basically at arm's length, so to speak, based on the individual water molecules' geometry. And so you get a lattice, you get an open lattice work. It's called, here they're calling it a crystal lattice. So individual water molecules are not as tightly packed in ice as they are in liquid, right? They're making and breaking hydrogen bonds there, but in ice, right, each water molecule is bound to 4 others. And I didn't think you can see it in that, so I blew up this and I found one here. So if I show you the one that I'm looking at, it's this water molecule right here. Okay, and I'm going to count the number of bonds. Let's do it in green. So here, this partially positive hydrogen is attracted to that partially negative oxygen. This partially positive hydrogen is attracted to that partially negative oxygen. And then we know that oxygen has these pairs of electrons so that they're each capable of making a hydrogen bond. There's 3 and here's 4, right? So these electrons on oxygen can give this partially negative region the ability to hydrogen bond to the partially positive hydrogen, right? And this region of partial negativity can bond to this particular hydrogen. So if you look at this water molecule, right, you can't see it because it depends on where you meet the lattice. Like, is it cut in the middle? You can see that it is making 4 hydrogen bonds to other, water molecules. So you get this very open lattice work, right, where there aren't that many water molecules. Okay, so what does this mean? Well, this means that ice floats. And since ice floats, then this is helpful for life in our oceans, for instance, because if ice sank, all of the ice would, the water at the air-water interface would turn into ice because of the cold air, and then this would sink, right? And then the next layer would freeze and sink, and then the next layer would freeze and sink, and oceans would freeze from the bottom up. And then when the temperatures change, when we get to a different season, right, then you could thaw the very top, let's say, but the rest of the ocean would stay frozen, or the rest of the body of water, whatever it is, would stay frozen, and so it wouldn't allow life to occur. So when you're looking at this ice cap, there's my timer. when you're looking at this ice cap, basically, it insulates the water underneath and it allows life to go on underneath this ice cap, right? So um, ice is ice not sinking is extremely helpful for life on Earth again. So that's very helpful. So let me show you my other video, and then I will release you. Okay, I like this video. The only thing I don't like about it is he calls the oxygen molecule negative and the hydrogen positive instead of partially, but overall the point is the same. And so as he shows you, these are hydrogen bonds that we're seeing in like a green laser-like thing. You have to watch closely because the molecules are turning and they're making different hydrogen bonds and as they move and turn and interact with others. So it's really kind of brings it to life a little bit. So let's just watch this and see if it helps.
In this video, we'll talk about hydrogen bonding and how it takes place and really try to give you a visual picture of what's going on there. So we have a water molecule here. We have the red is oxygen and the white are hydrogens. We have H2, then the oxygen, H2O. When we look at a water molecule, it is a polar molecule. That means that one side has a positive charge and the other has kind of a negative charge. We call it a dipole. In this case, oxygen's more electronegative than the hydrogens. So this is going to be the negative side, and this is going to be the positive side. It's polar, it has poles. If we look at the surface of the water molecule, kind of a force field extending around it because of that difference in electronegativity, we have our negative pole up here and our positive pole around here. This gives us this idea that the water molecule kind of has sides to it. That's really important. Let's take a look at how that plays out with just two water molecules. So we have these two water molecules and they're kind of frozen in space here. And we want to see how they behave in an actual sample of water. So we're going to let the computer simulate that. First, I'm going to optimize the model so it lines them up. We do that. We have a hydrogen bond here. Next, I'm going to set the temperature. Let's set up a simulation. Let's leave it right around room temperature. And now this is what we kind of think of as how water molecules are behaving in a sample of water at room temperature. Kind of crazy. They're moving around, they're spinning, and that's just the energy that's in the water there from the heat around. And they do stay together though. This hydrogen bond, it's breaking and reforming, but it stays consistent and holds them together. Every once in a while they start to move apart like they might evaporate, but it keeps them together. Let's turn the temperature up and see what happens. So now I'm going to take it up to about the same temperature as a Bunsen burner. That's a lot more energy. Remember, hydrogen bonds aren't really that strong. Compared to the oxygen and the hydrogen bond, covalent bond here, a hydrogen bond's pretty weak. Let's take it up to about 800. That's a Bunsen burner. And you can see that when we've done that, there's a look, there they go. They just can't stay together. There's too much energy. In essence, you could think of that sample of water, that very small 2-molecule sample of water, is either evaporating or turning to steam. Let's take a look at more water molecules, though, and see what happens. So here's a sample of a bunch of water molecules, and I'm going to put the hydrogen bonds in. And you can see how those hydrogen bonds, they form that network that really holds the water together. If we're thinking of a glass of water, this would be throughout the entire sample. Next, let's give us some energy here. Let's take and put it right about room temperature and see what happens. So there they are. These are our water molecules, and they're all kind of holding together. If you look at any one water molecule, you'll see that the hydrogen bonds are breaking and forming, but they do stay kind of attached together. When we think about the properties of water, it's cohesive, there's surface tension, it has a higher boiling point than similar liquids that don't have hydrogen bonding. The hydrogen bonding has a lot to do with how water behaves. Let's heat this up, see what happens. Let's take it up to that 800 degrees again. There we go. And you can see that when we do that, at 800 degrees, water is going to turn to steam. Those hydrogen bonds just aren't strong enough to hold it together, and it spreads out and forms a gas. So one interesting thing that happens because of hydrogen bonds, when we have water that is frozen, it takes a regular pattern. These are crystals, and a lot of that has to do with our hydrogen bonds here and how the water molecules are lining up so the positive and negative sides can be pointing at each other. So you see the hydrogen bonds here in our crystal of water. This would be moving a little bit as well. These molecules would be moving around some. A lot slower though, because there's not as much energy there. This is Dr. B. I hope this video has helped you kind of visualize those hydrogen bonds, that they aren't quite as strong as ionic or covalent, but they're very important bonds, give a lot of properties to water and to other compounds that exhibit hydrogen bonding. Thanks for watching.
Okay, I enjoyed his video very much, very soothing, and hopefully it brought it to life a little. Okay, we'll meet you for more properties of water in part 3.